Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Chris Best. I'm the group leader for the Human Factors Group in the Aerospace Division of DSTG, based down in Melbourne. To begin this session, it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Adrian Smith from the Air Force Institute of Aviation Medicine. Adrian's an aviation medicine specialist who's worked in academic aviation medicine now for over 20 years. As head of research for the RAF Institute of Aviation Medicine, he heads the Human Systems Integration team, and that's a team that he's worked with for 15 of the last 20 years. He represents ADF in a number of international working groups through TTCP, NATO, and other government-to-government forums. Adrian's studied aviation physiology at certificate level, diploma level, master's level, and PhD level. He's a fellow of the Australasian College of Aerospace Medicine, the Aerospace Medical Association, and the International Academy of Aviation and Space Medicine. He has extensive experience in a range of physical stresses that limit ADF air capability, including noise exposure and hearing protection, ergonomics and anthropometry, risks of and mitigation strategies for musculoskeletal injuries, and crash-related injuries, as well as developing evidence-based standards for aircrew selection and streaming. His special interest lies in the psychophysiological responses to in-flight hypoxia and hypoxia-like symptoms, and the role of practical hypoxia training to improve flight safety in the modern Air Force. Adrian will be kicking off the session today by talking about the importance of maintaining a focus on the human in the loop when undertaking research in defence human sciences. Welcome, Adrian, and over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll just share the screen. So thank you and welcome to this afternoon's session. And I'd like to thank the conference, the symposium organisers for giving the Institute of Aviation Medicine an opportunity to just share our perspective on the importance of translational research in our sort of world with a very specific aircrew focus. As Chris has said, I head the Human Systems Integration flight. And that's a small team comprised of myself, a human factors specialist, and 3 aviation medicine researchers. And we really operate in the area where we look at how aircrew fit and perform within an aviation system, how human performance impacts capability and safety, as well as how aviation systems impact aircrew performance, well-being, and safety. And we do all of this with the aim of optimizing aircrew performance and sustaining their endurance. And when aircrew are operating in areas where they are approaching limits of performance or endurance, we really work hard to try and characterize the hazards so that we can work with aircrew and their commanders to inform a risk assessment to make sure that when aircrew operate, that the hazards are managed so far as reasonably practicable.
Adrian, sorry to jump in there. This is Chris. I think we're having a bit of trouble with your slides. So if you're okay with it, I think Jess will host the slides. We might just need a second to switch over.
Yep.
Great, thanks. Okay, looks like we're good to go now.
Yep, the audio came through all right?
Yep, all good. Yep, we're good to go now. Sorry for the interruption.
That's right. Just on to the next slide. And the next slide, please. So we're part of the Air Warfare Centre, and that's part of Air Command. However, notwithstanding that we're an Air Force Institute of Aviation Medicine, we do provide aeromedical and human factors support to Army and Navy aviation assets, as well as to Air Command. Next slide. We support a wide range of defence and external to defence stakeholders, But in this forum, we do provide support to DST Group as the need arises. And we also support industry and universities on a non-commercial basis where their activities are in support of defence capability and defence tasking. Next slide. So essentially, aircrew engage the Institute of Aviation Medicine when they reach a crossroads where they're unable to continue operations and request some assistance helping determine a pathway forward. And that might be that the equipment is inadequate. It might be that the orders and instructions and procedures either disallow a course of action or are silent. They may have identified a hazard, or there may be some concern that progressing is associated with a known or an unknown hazard, and they want some advice on what should we do to continue operating. So we can work with aircrew to identify and interpret policies. We can leverage accepted practices. We do a reasonable amount of applied research that is highly targeted and operationally focused. And we generally deliver in the short term, in the 3 to 6 months window. But if the timing is such or the research is impractical, we may be called upon to provide a first principles response to the issue based on our SME advice derived from our interpretation of the available literature. And we do that as part of a holistic risk assessment to help aircrew decide what is an appropriate course of action and how they can move forward in a safe way. Next slide. And so we provide whatever level of SME advice or technical support or research activity is necessary to bridge the gap. So where aircrew find that they're unable to continue and the operational objective that they need to achieve, we will help support their decision-making to bridge that gap. Next slide. Sometimes that might require us working with defence stakeholders to help them understand the gap. That might be a technical gap or a technological gap. It might be a knowledge and information gap, but we help them understand what is it that is preventing them from moving forward and what information do they need to make a decision. And then we work with them to help navigate a research pathway and help with research and development and test and evaluation. Next. We operate in a very wide scope. So aviation physiology, physical stresses, anthropometry, ergonomics, musculoskeletal injuries, life support equipment, vision, vestibular, medical standards, and human factors and fatigue. And all of these have in common that they relate to the human in the loop. And we're really operating in the area where we try and make sure that whatever plan is considered for defence takes into consideration the weaknesses and limitations posed by the human in the loop. Next. And so we, as I said, we help defence define a capability gap that needs to be bridged in order to achieve an operational objective where the risks are managed so far as reasonably practicable. But in achieving that, we see it as our role to maintain the focus of the discussion on the needs and shortcomings of the human in the loop, and helping keep in front of mind at all times what is the information necessary to inform a decision and what action is required. And so we're heavily focused on actionable outcomes where the research should lead to an outcome that can be incorporated into a protocol, a limit, a procedure, a training package, or some sort of weighting that can be applied to risk. It's worth pausing at this stage to just reflect that defence stakeholders are probably not as interested in the academic nitty-gritty of science with the focus on raw data and sophisticated statistical testing and p-values and tables and graphs. That's our job. So as researchers, that's what we are focused on. The defence stakeholders just want to know, what does this study tell me and how can it help me make a decision or determine an appropriate course of action? And so as researchers, we have to really maintain our focus on delivering a research output that satisfies a defence requirement to make a decision, not necessarily satisfy an academic output that generates lots of data and statistical testing. Next. But to do that, we work both with defence stakeholders and research and industry stakeholders. From a defence point of view, we help defence clearly define the deficiency so that everybody understands what is the problem that needs to be solved. Sometimes researchers or industry representatives can latch onto an issue and take it where they think the research needs to go, rather than focus on what is the takeaway message that defence needs. What is the information that they need to make a decision to move forward in a safe way? As I said, we're really focused on actionable outcomes, but especially those that have a meaningful impact on reducing risk or increasing capability. And a lot of research that helps colour an issue or helps add granularity, if it doesn't fundamentally change the decision that needs to be made, we help our defence determine how to incorporate all of this new and emerging research. We have been called for defence projects to help defence stakeholders interpret a range of scientific reports that have been generated. Hundreds of pages, lots of tables, full of very precise data and sophisticated statistical testing. And then the defence stakeholders read the executive summary and say, yes, but how long can I fly for? And in their mind, that's what success is. So we need to be focused on delivering a successful outcome, which answers the question that the defence stakeholders are trying to resolve. And we need to make sure that that defence is focused on that, and that the researchers and that industry partners are also focused on fixing the problem that defence has, not fixing the problem that industry think that they can fix. We work with defence to help interpret the results and help convert actionable results into a procedure or a training module or something like that. We also help defence by contextualizing the study design, making sure that they understand what are the assumptions that underpin the study, what are the constraints and limitations, how were the participants selected or deselected, how was the study conducted, so that we can understand the extent to which the results can be translated into an operational setting. We also work with researchers and industry to make sure that they have a good understanding of the defence requirements, and that they choose a methodology that is appropriate for the question that needs to be answered and is likely to deliver an actionable output. Importantly, the report needs to be written in a way that can be easily understood and consumed by a defence stakeholder. And remember that defence stakeholders are intelligent and educated, but they don't have the same depth or breadth of domain knowledge as the researchers. And a report that is written in a way that would satisfy a PhD thesis or would be suitable for publication in a tier 1 scientific journal may not have the desired impact when it's read by a lay reader. And from a successful, effective defence human sciences point of view, we need to focus on results that have penetration and pull through, that actually go through to the user group and actually change something so that we can help aircrew move forward. And at the end of the day, we need to provide results in a way that meaningfully address the issue at hand and can be applied in a real world context. Next slide. And so just a couple of examples. So the binocular enhanced vision system fitted to the KC-30 aerial tanker, a sophisticated 3D optical system The manufacturer says it improves your depth perception threefold. This is a significant advantage to the speed and accuracy of air-to-air refueling. It is a highly engineered piece of technical equipment. Next slide. However, our aircrew are not selected with stereo visual acuity in mind. And so we have an unselected aircrew population without regard to those who have got better than normal, or weak stereo visual acuity. And yet we have a piece of equipment that arguably requires a high degree of stereo visual acuity. So we're at this dilemma where we have a very sophisticated piece of equipment, no doubt underpinned by thousands of hours of human research, but the user population may not have the native stereo visual acuity to take full advantage of the engineering technology and the operational advantages that would bring. Further to that, we have a system that requires the use of polarized lenses, but they're not compatible with aircrew spectacles. So when 30% of aircrew wear spectacles, a system that is not compatible with spectacles significantly limits the application. Next. And so we really need to understand, how do we select aircrew to take full advantage of the equipment? And that really is the human dimension. Next. When you're looking at optical systems research, have a really good understanding of what the stakeholders' issues are. Are they interested in reports that a subgroup of aircrew are experiencing headaches and visual distortion and nausea? Are they interested in the fact that some aircrew have reduced accuracy with an optical system, or are they worried about some aircrew taking longer to master the operational skill? And any research that is purely focused on the optical qualities, looking at tolerance, image separation, resolution, alignment, and drift from factory specifications, if that isn't linked to predicting which aircrew get headaches or demonstrating that improving the tolerance reduces visual distortion, all of that really good human research hasn't really had an impact on addressing the issue at hand. Next. In a similar way, with musculoskeletal issues, what is it that defence is really interested in? Are they interested in the subjective self-reports of pain, or are they more interested in the time loss or reduced capability linked to injuries? And so research that is aimed at showing that a conditioning program increases fitness or strength or endurance or flexibility, if it's not linked to a reduction in time loss or reduction of pain, is not actually addressing the core issue of concern to the defence stakeholders. Next. Over the last couple of days, we've seen a number of presentations that have looked at computer-based tools. Those computer-based tools are going to be mounted into a workstation. That workstation is going to be mounted onto a platform. We have here an example of a workstation that was highly engineered and designed exactly to meet the specifications of the platform. Next slide. Without regard to the fact that the seat couldn't be adjusted. And so we have a system where an average or above average occupant can't fit. And you can see how cramped the arms are. This is an unusable system, and the unusable workstation significantly limits the utility of the tool that is embedded in that workstation. Next. And that's not a unique feature. Here's another workstation that was engineered to fit within the available space. Next. But you can see in the bottom here that the midline of the seat is actually offset from the keyboard, which is offset from the monitor. So a person sitting in this seat to use this workstation has to adopt an ergonomically strained position, which will place them at increased risk of injury. Next. And that is compounded by the fact that the design didn't support the arms. So you've got somebody in a strained ergonomic posture with unsupported arms and shoulders. No matter how good the tool is on the screen, it's going to have a reduced impact if it can't be used by normal defence members. Next. We've looked at CBRN ensemble, a lot of effort going into thermal stress and hydration. Hydration is really important, both in terms of preventing dehydration as well as moderating the effects of thermal stress. Next. But for us, the bigger issue is that if aircrew can't urinate, then they will deliberately restrict their fluid intake because they can't urinate, which then compounds the effect of dehydration on thermal stress. So for us, it's not so much a problem of promoting the need to hydrate, it's actually trying to fix a barrier that prevents them from hydrating. Next. And then, of course, we're also thinking of a very good technical system, but how can you wear spectacles? What about hearing protection? And those human dimensions will undermine the endurance in this system. Next. Looking at the HPRnet lines of effort, there is a lot of stuff that IAM is working on where we can leverage the HPRnet collaboration. Two large projects looking at neck force modelling and injury risk prediction in fast jet aircrew through the University of Canberra UC Rise, and looking at eye tracking with seeing machines and a variety of defence stakeholders. Next. But just looking at real-time in-flight monitoring, defence doesn't really need a heart rate monitor or a pulse oximeter. We don't really need to know that the Garmin Fenix or that Apple Watch consumer electronics that already provide this. What we actually need is a device that answers the question, the pilot who felt confused in the flight this morning, is there a physiological explanation for those symptoms? Next. And so we're looking at not just cardiorespiratory physiology, hydration, thermal fatigue, where there are wide swings of physiological changes during dynamic flight. And some of those changes are normal, but at other times they might be indicative of a problem, and the environment is quite arduous. So we really need to maintain a focus, not on delivering a gadget, but on a gadget that answers the question. Next. And we've already talked about workstation ergonomics and just the importance of looking at the whole system, not just having a monitor with a tool, but making sure that that monitor is something that integrates with a seat, with people, with the range of intended users. Next. And so defence has a requirement. Next. Academia is very good at doing laboratory studies and experimental studies to analyse the factors, lots of graphs and generating lots of data. Next. Industry will find a technical solution that delivers a function within the design specifications. Next. OT&E will demonstrate that the item functions as expected. Next. But what we really need is a group of people that say, does it actually fix the problem? Has the issue been addressed? Can it be used by a range of operators under normal conditions? What about females? What about tall, short people? What about people that wear glasses? Can they drink? And these are the human dimensions that will really limit how well human research can translate to an operational output. Next. And the very elegant research R&D OT&E loop, next, is really underpinned by a robust human systems integration approach to consider the real world application of that science in the hands of real people in a real environment and the variability that shows. Next. So just to summarize, effective translational research really relies on a clear understanding of the capability deficiency with a good understanding of what action the defence stakeholders need. What's the information that they need to make a decision and satisfy their requirement, and make sure that the actionable outcomes are communicated in a way that, that the stakeholders can understand. Next. Essentially, understand the core issue, address the question, right for the customer, and deliver actionable outcomes. And then final slide. It's important to remember that a 5th generation fighter, next, is operated by a pilot marked 1.3, and this is Adam and Eve wearing a helmet, an oxygen mask, and an anti-G suit. They get tired, they get distracted, they get thirsty, they wear glasses. They're tall, they're short, they're fat. And if all of the human science that goes into the systems that give the F-35, in this case, its significant operational advantage, hundreds of thousands of hours of human science have gone into these systems. But if we don't take full time to consider the human limitations of the person operating the system, the human in the loop, then we significantly limit the way that science can translate into an operational outcome. And from a translational point of view, it's been our experience that aircrew are really interested in what does science tell me to inform a decision I need to make to continue to operate. And that's really where we maintain our focus. So thank you very much for the time, and be happy to take some questions at the end of the session. Chris?
Thanks very much, Adrian. Some great messages there about how to translate our outcomes into operational impact. So thank you for that. And if you're happy to stick around for questions, we'll have Q&A at the end of the session, just like the previous sessions. So please do pop your questions for Adrian and the other speakers into the Hoover app with a little at the start, so we know who to direct those to. And we'll move right along. So our first speaker is Associate Professor John Cass from WSU, who'll be talking about AR under stress. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Good. And I take it you can see my slides as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for this opportunity. So our project done at Western Sydney University with a fairly large group of researchers actually from across the university, including my colleague here, Associate Professor Gabrielle Wiedemann, in conjunction with our DST representative, Larissa Cahill. We're interested in head-mounted displays, specifically augmented reality and virtual reality systems. Now, as HMDs become used more and more by defence, this actually raises several questions. So HMDs, including augmented reality systems, they're really useful insofar as they enable the presentation of enormous amounts of information, potentially, to the viewer. But the question remains, however, the quite fundamental question: how much information can the user actually take in? So how much augmented reality information can they take in? And even more importantly, perhaps, is how is that affected by things like cognitive load and stress? So it's the purpose of this project to create an augmented reality system that's actually sensitive to users' variable neural, cognitive, and affective states, with the view of creating a system that might be capable of adapting to those states in a way that's going to maximize and enhance performance. So what we've learned so far. So to summarize what we've learned, and I'll show you some data in a moment, humans do have a limited visual capacity. And this is evident both in screen-based tasks, so with a conventional screen, but also with HMDs. We also find that audiovisual multitasking, that is cognitive load tasks, multitasking tasks, can actually improve performance quite unexpectedly. And I'll show you some of those data shortly. Conversely, we find that anticipatory anxiety-induced stress can actually impair capacity. So we have some apparently, on the face of it, conflicting results here, which I think is quite interesting. In terms of what this means for ADF capabilities, well, first and foremost, the effectiveness of HMDs might actually be impaired by the presence of anticipatory stress. And consequently, the design of HMDs ideally should be capable of detecting when stress is there and adapting the displays accordingly. In our experiments conducted so far, we find that there's no relationship, well, there's no strong relationship at this stage between switching between auditory and visual tasks on our ability to extract visual information, although there is some evidence that can actually help you. So I'm just going to walk you through some of our data. So the project was initially scheduled to be in two parts. The first phase involved creating a system in virtual reality. We would then pilot that and generate our, essentially identify what the basic parameters are, basic psychological and physiological parameters, and then move that system into an augmented reality system. So what I'm showing you here is a couple of scenes from the experiment that we've created. So we created a paradigm from scratch. We've actually invented this paradigm. So here we have these strange little lines here. These are called Gabor patches, something that are used by vision scientists around the world. And you might notice they're oriented. And the task here is for the observer to identify which direction on average these lines or Gabor patches are pointing. And the reason for this is that this is a way, in order for the observer to do the task, they actually have to take in information from all elements. If they don't take information from all elements, their performance will be impaired. So that's why we're using this kind of task. It's called an orientation averaging task. Once they've made their decision, whether it's left or right, they then have to turn and use a virtual gun to shoot one of these two soldiers in front of them. One is designated as being the enemy and one's the friendly. The direction of the Gabors informs the observer of which one is the enemy. If they shoot the wrong one, then the participant gets shot in the virtual world, at least. So there are a few things we're varying here. One thing is the amount of orientation variance. And if we look at performance down here, we see that if we compare the red and the blue curve, on the y-axis, we've got overall accuracy. And on average, when you have more variance, predictably performance is worse. But the other thing that we're varying is the number of elements. If you use a single element, performance is excellent, very good. However, predictably, as we increase the number of elements, performance declines precipitously. So showing us that we have a limited perceptual capacity. And it's the rate at which this falls off, which is our index of visual capacity. So this was working really well. As you can see, this is the data we've created in our virtual reality version of our task. And then COVID hit. And so we went into lockdown and we weren't able to access our lab for how many months was it?
About 6 months.
About 6 months, yes. So consequently, we had to pivot rather quickly. And fortunately, we had some excellent members of staff on the team, as well as our postdoc. And we created an online version of the task. So this is not ideal. So we're using an online task via a screen. And so we basically have the same kind of task. So we have the similar kinds of manipulations. And as you can see, performance declines as you increase the number of elements. What I'm showing you here, though, is actually a comparison of a case where whilst doing the task, which is the red curve, if we then also included a cognitively demanding task, which we use an NBAC task. So we use an auditory NBAC task. So it's a multi-sensory audio-visual multitasking task. you find that performance actually improved. So the blue curve versus the red curve. We were totally surprised by this. And we also find that's the case with reaction time as well. So it's borne out across 2 separate experiments there. On the other hand, we also manipulated the level of stress. So for our participants, at the beginning of the task, we told half of the participants that at the end of the task, they had to do an anxiety-inducing task. That is, they had to give a speech to a group of professors. That was a complete lie, but that's what they believed. And if we compare now the red curve, which is the participants who weren't given those instructions to do the anxiety-inducing task, you see their performance decreases with number of elements. But in the case of the subjects who were given the anxiety-inducing task, performance falls off more readily, effectively showing that they have a more limited perceptual capacity. This is consistent with the idea that as anxiety increases, their functional sampling efficiency declines. So we got opposite effects for cognitive load and our stressful anxiety-inducing task. So moving forward, the next step, which is happening this month, is to, well, first of all, we're currently now testing back in the lab in VR, but we're having the full augmented reality and and our multi-screen immersive system will be delivered this month, if not January. And we're also going to be measuring eye tracking, that is, and pupillometry. And we're going to use variations in pupil diameter as an index of cognitive load.
Terrific. John, we might have to.
Apologies.
Yeah, might have to move on there, and we can pick up sort of work going forward in the Q&A, if that's okay. So our next speaker is Professor Mike Nichols, and Mike is going to be talking about AR blindness. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just share my screen. Share it, and get this presentation going. So everybody can see the presentation, can they?
Not just yet.
Oh, not just yet. Okay, let's see what I've done wrong. Let's just come back to it, and there we go. Share that should have it now. And there we go. And there.
Got it.
How does that look for everyone?
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh, excellent. Okay, look, thanks, Chris. And look, this follows on nicely from what John and Gabe were presenting. So look, this work was done with my colleagues, Oren Griffiths, Sal Rasso, Toby Loescher, and who's from UniSA, and Chris Brady from DST. So thanks to all of them for their work on this project. And the purpose is, once again, to understand augmented reality. And instead of looking at stress, we're sort of looking at it from the viewpoint that it can both help, but also can hinder performance. Now, obviously, you know, we are encountering augmented reality in our cars. A whole bunch of tasks are being helped with that. And what it is basically is a screen coming up in front of you, or some sort of display overlaid over the real world, where you're given some sort of cues to help you. And you see this in cars now. But the problem is, and this is a problem we're interested in, is that it can capture your attention so thoroughly that you actually miss something very, very obvious in front of you and run straight into it. So what we've done is just designed a set of experiments that examine whether cues and we're actually interested in combatants. So whether you actually cue a combatant and whether that can actually facilitate your performance in detecting that combatant, but also if it makes you miss something really obvious. So firstly, we actually got the technology to work, which was pretty good. We're using a whole bunch of electroencephalographic eye tracking and virtual reality. So congratulations to Sal Rosso who got that to work. We found that queuing assists ability to detect any enemy combatants. So when we did queue them, people were better at doing that. I'll show you the data in a minute. However, they did cause them also to miss something really obvious in front of them. And I'll give you a look at that in a minute. So while we think there's clear advantages for providing visual aids on the battlefield, I think we also need to be really careful that we don't overwhelm people. So let me give you a look at the task, and here it is. So Sal Russo put this together. So this is an overwatch, and I'll just show with my mouse. You can see there's 4 people you're effectively looking after. So 1, 2, and there's one up here at the back and another one up the back. And what we're doing is queuing the potential combatants. And you'll see the person's task is to click on any danger they see, but you can see that person stabbed them. So you've got to click on them within a couple of seconds to protect the people you're looking after. And there's a number of conditions here. One where we validly queue the people who are likely to attack the people you're looking after. We've got invalid queues, and also we've got where there's no queue at all. But importantly, we have a rare gunman coming on, and you can see him there. Did you actually? So we were hoping that people sort of are overwhelmed by these queues, and we missed that really potentially very dangerous person there. So that's our task. The final thing is to notice is that you can see that they're flickering, and that is, we're looking for resonance in the brain. So they're flickering at 15 hertz, and we're looking for that same sort of registration in the brain to see if people are attending to those cues. And here are our results. So on the left-hand side, we've got the benefits that have been accrued from this, and over the right-hand side, the costs. So just quickly look at the benefits. We can see along the x-axis, we've got where we had no queue, the invalid queue, and a valid queue. And on the y-axis, we've got reaction time. And what you can see straight away is that when the combatants are queued with a valid queue, people are much quicker here compared to the other 2 conditions. So the queue is helping people. And I'll set my timer. There we go. And with regards to viewing time, we can also see that people are spending a lot of time looking at the queue. And so obviously they're using the queue and it's providing a benefit. Over here, this is where it gets really interesting. And what we find is that people's capacity to detect that rare gunman is actually enhanced when there's no queue. So when there's no queuing, no flickering boxes around the people are more likely to actually see that gunman. But when they have got either the invalid queue or the valid queue, they seem to be attending to that, and that's making them miss that very, very important target. Finally, down here on the bottom graph, we've got reaction time along the x-axis, and the y-axis, this is the degree to which the brain's been entrained, and what we're measuring with the EEG. And what we're finding is that people who are slower to detect that gunman are also paying more attention to the flickering cue. So we're getting quite a nice relationship, a co-registration of what's happening in the brain with their actual performance. So look, the takeaway message here is that queuing could provide enormous benefits. We spoke to military when we're designing this task, and it seems that this isn't too far away, that the queues might be available to identify friendlies versus enemies. And look, this seems to be a good task for it. We're also really quite surprised by how the virtual reality worked, and just how how it provided a really quite real experience for people carrying out this task. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Mike. So just a reminder to everyone, pop your questions in Hoover, and we'll keep moving right along. We're a little bit behind. So just a reminder for everyone to try and keep it as close as you can to the 5 minutes. So our next speaker is Dr. Amanda Douglas from Deakin University, who's going to be speaking about colour displays and laser eye protection. Over to you, Amanda.
Can you guys all see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Great. So this is a project, and I'd just like to thank both HPRnet and the Office of Naval Research Global for funding this. This is a partnership between optometry at Deakin, engineering in ISRI at Deakin, and DSTG, and that's been wonderful to work through that. So what we're aiming to do in this project is have a look at the effect on colour vision with different laser eye protections, and then have a look. So that's sort of part one, and that's some of the pilot results that I'll show you today. And then the further aim moving on from that is to examine what effect does this change in colour vision have on our user, what effect on task efficiency, and can we modify that? So can we modify the colours that we're presenting and the spectrum of what we're presenting to make it user friendly with this laser eye protection? So the product at the end and the aim at the end is to have some evidence-based recommendations for which colours we should be using in our future visual displays as we bring about colour into our technology to be used with the laser eye protection that is really important for keeping our people safe. So what have we learnt so far? So far we have been up to Oki and had a look at the different laser eye protection that was in use there, and we had some of that brought back to the lab. We've pilot tested some of what the effect of the laser eye protection is on colour vision testing using computerized measures. So not just using it for a pass-fail, have you got colour issues, but actually putting a number on it. And what we've seen is a significant reduction in that short wavelength blue sensitivity, which kind of makes sense because we're thinking about the sorts of lasers that we might be getting some glare issues and some attacks from. But we're also seeing this interesting effect of then it really pushing an increased sensitivity towards that green and the red sensitivity. What this means for ADF so far is that the use of blue symbols where we're going to need them probably should be avoided, or we should be making them brighter when we're using colour displays with laser eye protection. We have only had a look at the one piece of laser eye protection at the moment because we're in Melbourne, so we have copped some fairly significant COVID shutdowns. But I will go through a little bit of the science. So this is the background in terms of talking about the laser eye protection effects on colour vision. So for a colour normal observer, this is the CCT results there. So we're looking at the sensitivity for the long, medium and short wavelength cones in the eye. And they're normally presented against a grey background, and you're asked to indicate which direction that is, and it's a alternative force choice to eventually work out where you can't really see things. What we are seeing, so on the left there is the results without a laser eye protection. On the right is the effect of looking at those same tests, but through the laser eye protection. And so we're seeing that reduction in blue, which we expect. But we are also seeing this increase in some of the other areas, and we really do think that that's shifting the spectrum that we're actually presenting to our observer. Very similar effect for our colour deficient observer. So down the bottom there, we've got a person who has difficulty seeing green and reduced sensitivity to green wavelengths because they've got an altered middle wavelength cone. This is our most common type of observer. I am going to heads up some of the questions in advance there that this person is just outside the ability to normally fly, but we are planning to look at those who'd be on the borderline or still within the limits. And what we see there is that we see this increase in their results. And so that really does justify why we don't let them wear lenses when they're doing the colour tests to begin with for our colour vision assessments. But it also raises some interesting questions of what we should be presenting on the screen there. So that will sort of be next steps of thinking about where we go with that. So we've got to characterise a few different LEPs and have a look at the different areas that these are used in, but then also have a look at different colour spectra schemas that we can be thinking about for when colour vision is integrated into our visual display systems, because it does offer a bunch of improvements in terms of reaction time, in terms of queuing and other elements. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mad. So as always, pop your questions for the Q&A into the Hoover app if you have any. Moving right along, our next speaker is Professor Shane Loft, and Shane is going to be talking about the transparency of autonomous systems. Shane, over to you.
Hi everybody. Everyone can see my screen?
Yep, Looks good.
Okay. Yeah, so the partners on this are the Defence Science and Technology Group, the University of Queensland, Ken McAnally, Oregon State University, which is Jason McCarley, and then Jason Bell, Troy Visser, and myself from UWA. The purpose is to establish principles for designing transparent automation that so that operators can use automation accurately and efficiently. It's sort of inspired by the Autonomous Warrior Joint Military Exercise that was done in 2018. What we're looking for are generalizable principles if possible. And this sort of stemmed from looking at the ISO international standards, which currently refer to making automation clear or providing access to raw data. That's about all they say about transparency, these ISO international standards. So hopefully we can build on that. The product will be publication in high quality international scholarly journals and delivery of best practice guidelines for the ADF for designing transparent automation in their operational environments, but also the delivery of methods and measures that can be used if the ADF wanted to test out some of these design principles in higher fidelity simulations with experts. So how to measure the outcomes, such as SA workload, performance and things like that. What have we learned so far? So the project took 18 months to get funded, and thankfully it was funded just on the 15th of October 2021. So we're off. So the new dates are October 21 to October 23 now. We're currently developing the uninhabited vehicle management task and the experimental design. The first study will be conducted in early 2022. I've just listed those papers there because they're the papers from the smaller research funding we had with BSDG that lead up to this project. So if anyone's interested, that's the stuff we've done so far, but we are changing the paradigm because we believe that the paradigm needs to be changed to reflect things that have happened since then. But that's the stuff that's been done so far. Not for this project, but the previous project. What does it mean for the ADF? Well, increasing the transparency of automation should allow operators to use automation more efficiently and accurately, because they will be able to understand the reasoning of automated advice. And we expect that automation transparency should be able to impact some of the negative impacts of things like concurrent task demands. When someone's really busy doing a concurrent non-automated task, it's a natural thing to take your eye off the task that's been automated to a reasonably high level. That's an optimal strategy, in my opinion. But if you have transparent information, it should allow people to be able to quickly assess the extent to which they need to dive into the automation to verify its advice. Finally, so the science. This is a sort of the task we've got going so far, which I won't talk about now, but this is our current version. 3 things you want to achieve. You only want to present the information required for the operator to be able to check it. You don't want to present too much information, just enough information, because some of our earlier studies, those papers I listed, they found increased workload and other things. So you only want to present what's needed for the operator to be able to quickly look over and check the advice. But you also want to present the information in a way that the operator can comprehend the significance of that advice. They need to be able to understand some sort of environmental constraint or something, or the rationale underlying the automated advice. They need to be able to comprehend it very quickly. And finally, we want to be able to, this is the most ambitious part of the project, be able to cue people's attention to transparency information when needed. That might be something like it's a high risk situation, so you cue people's attention to check out the automated advice in a bit more detail than they usually would, or perhaps when you detect that their workload is too low, perhaps they're not putting in the effort and monitoring the advice and you want to get their attention back, or other eye tracking sort of triggers, could be other things. So looking forward to doing this, and thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Alrighty, so our next speaker is Professor Mari Voloniki from University of New South Wales, and Mari is going to be talking about autonomous team tasking.
Oh.
Over to you, Mari.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and good afternoon. Our project is under autonomous teams, and the full title is Predicting and Improving Team Performance by Incorporating an Autonomous Advisory System, thus the short title. In our team, our partners is Major Russell Hamsey from the 20th Surveillance and Target Acquisition Regiment. From DST is Dr. Vicky G, our partner and collaborator. And within the UNSW team, other than myself, is David Rai, Teresa Krier, Nadine Marcus, which is a new member of our team, and in advisory, Professor Katsune Watanabe. The purpose of the project is to develop a non-intrusive multi-sensory system that can be installed in the Shadow Ground Control Station to estimate the cognitive workload of operators, and an AI-based autonomous advisory system to predict and improve team performance. The final product is really the implementation of a working autonomous advisory system prototype in operational GCS. So our original motivation for the project was really to improve our understanding, the team's understanding of human performance, specifically with regards to individual and team performance during mixed cognitive and physical tasks, and the dynamic relocation of these tasks to improve overall team performance. We choose to observe the following signals that have been linked to cognitive load that I'm sure most members are familiar: eye and pupil movements, respiration rate, heart rate, posture and pose, facial expression, and affective speech instead of speech recognition. Given that I just have to emphasize that for us, this was really application-driven research. So given that the operational shifts of the 20 STA shadow operators may last up to 14 hours, our highest priority was to select sensors that they were not intrusive to the operators, and also were able to determine as many as possible physical and physiological signals remotely. In addition, we were motivated to choose sensors that they were suitable for the very small restricted space in the ground control station. And of course, they had to be cost effective if we were proposing a system that could be implemented into several stations. Next slide. Okay, sorry. What we've learned so far, because before what we've learned so far, okay, obviously our project have been affected by COVID-19 pandemic in two very obvious ways. The first one, we were not able to visit, or to continue our visits to 20 STA and Major Hamsey's team in Brisbane. And the second one is the National Facility for Human Robot Interaction Research, where I'm situated at the moment, was closed for extended periods of time. So physical access to the facility and physical access to a project that the situational context makes all the difference were really on the negative side. But so we needed two elements to progress. Okay, the first one was the expert information on operational procedures. Excuse me, that's UNSW update system software notifications, my apologies. So yes, the first one, we needed 2 elements to progress: expert information, operational procedures, and a better understanding of the actual physical environment in the ground control station. And when I say physical environment, it's the sonic environment, other than the physical dimensions, what people are wearing, the changes in the lighting conditions, the temperature, shifts in temperature, all of these things. So we address the physical space by building a one-to-one scale physical mock-up. Actually, maybe I'll move to the next slide so you can see the green box, that it's identical in dimensions to the operation. The chairs are different, and these chairs can move, but this is the exact distance that one operator sits next to another. So in the facility, and we mount an interface, the selected sensors, and evaluate the suitability of 3 different software programs to produce a simulated task environment within the mockup. So the 3 softwares that simulation softwares that we evaluated this year was the Presage's UAV Craft, the Meta VR Simulator, and the NASA's multitask attribute battery. And at this current stage, we're working with the NASA software, designing experiments to be implemented, hopefully in the beginning of next year. We just did some preliminary testing with our team to make sure that they're actually functioning as a primary experiment. So at this implemented in a mixed reality environment, I would like to clarify what I mean by mixed reality environment. I don't mean virtual reality. I mean environments that involve simulation within physical triggers by elements that exist in the operational environment, such as changes in the sound levels, temperature, lighting conditions, and similar. I will conclude by going 1 slide back. What does that mean for ADF capabilities? We're talking about this year, not future capabilities. The first one is a novel non-intrusive interface designing for 2 UAS operators. Our sensors are network at this stage, and we can get clean data without any wearables within the close proximity of where the operators fly. Improvement of future simulations training environment. We believe that we would be able to provide some sort of maybe future guideline of how to better use mix environments testing, and I guess more long-term potential application of research outcomes to other high-load remote monitoring and control environments, and obviously for us very high priority the next generation of robots. Thank you so much for your time. And now I'll attempt to exit.
Thanks so much, Mari. So our final speaker is coming up. Just before I introduce him, be sure, for the audience, be sure to jump into Hoover and have a look at the questions and use the voting buttons so that we can help to prioritise what we get to. We will let the conversation, the Q&A session, run a little bit longer since we've found ourselves a tiny bit over time. Yeah, it will help us just to know, which questions to ask first if you jump in there and use those thumbs up buttons. So our final speaker before the Q&A session is Professor Mike Richardson, and Mike's going to be talking about adaptive agents for team training. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Tim. It's good to be here, even if only virtually. Yeah, so our project is aimed to demonstrate how we can model the behavior of individuals in team tactical operation command and control context using kind of hierarchical, dynamical, computational, and machine learning techniques. And then demonstrate how we can use these models to develop artificial agents capable of robust human-machine interaction, but can also kind of replicate human behavior in a way to facilitate team training. We've got a great team at Macquarie University, including a number of individuals from the Psychological Sciences and Department of Computing, as well as a range of fantastic students and other collaborators from other universities. And then our fantastic DST collaborators, Simon Hosking and Christopher Best. What we proposed to produce over the course of this project was a framework for capturing the perceptual motor decision-making and verbal communication of individuals in these command and control teams contexts. Then demonstrate how you can use this framework to develop AAs capable of robust human interaction, and ultimately employ these AAs for the development of human AA training systems. So a relatively tall order, but one that we thought we could achieve within the time course of the project. So what have we done so far? Well, we've developed a multiplayer online video game that we use for both the development of our framework and for testing it. Obviously, I don't have time to go into too many details, but essentially it's a first-person multiplayer game. People download it. The 3 images there on the right of this video, the top 2 in the bottom left, of what we call a ground player, so someone who moves around trying to identify, target, contain, and corral kind of robotic agents within the environment. And then we also have another player that can serve as kind of an operator. They fly a drone around and can provide information to the ground players about where other team members are, as well as where targets are. We can manipulate difficulty by changing visibility. We have various types of heads-up displays. We can also do multi-team. So we have scenarios where 2 or more teams can compete against each other in this task. And of course, they can all communicate to each other with people in their teams. So we've been recording this data. We've recorded a large number of teams over multiple sessions, going from novice to expert performance. And we've already pretty much demonstrated how we can model the movements and the decision-making behavior of agents playing this game in terms of both how they move around the world, the agents they choose, and the decision-making processes that go on. So to some extent, we've already kind of achieved some of what we promised in terms of what this means for ADF capabilities. So in employing kind of artificial teammates to train individuals, we can insert them in at different levels of skill to create target-specific training scenarios. And then we can also use these same methods that we've developed for creating these artificial agents to both assess human performance within team context, and then potentially create autonomous agents that can work collaboratively with teams in these contexts. Some of the science behind it, well, of course, the dynamical models that we've been using to capture the movement dynamics of people within these spaces. And we've demonstrated you need just a small set of these dynamical functions to capture movements, not only in this kind of task, but in a whole range of perceptual motor tasks. And then we use Turing test methodologies to validate that people are unaware that they're interacting with an artificial agent, and that the models do produce truly human type movement dynamics. We've used supervised machine learning and long short-term memory neural networks to model the decision-making processes. So for example, in the herding task, or the desert herding task that we're using for this particular project, we can model the target selection dynamics at the individual level, as well as at the collective level, at well above 90% accuracy. And we can do that both at short time scales, so within seconds, but also predict people's decisions as far as 20 seconds beyond the decisions at main. So not only predicting it, but then also the ability to create technologies which can kind of suggest to novice users which decisions they should make within these kind of complex task scenarios. More recently, we've been using new explainable AI techniques to uncover what's the informational sources that experts compared to novices are using to make these decisions. So again, we can use these to scale the kind of expert level of our AA, but we can also use these to assess where a novice or a trainee is making incorrect decisions and what incorrect information they're using in those decisions. The key to wrapping up this project is, of course, integrating a communication into our artificial agents, both at the level of the ground player as well as the operator. This is the ongoing part of the project. We have made some positive strides in this direction using various techniques of natural language processing and deep reinforcement learning. But we're really going to focus over the next year and moving into the final stages of the project on trying to integrate those communication architectures within the movement and decision-making processes to create kind of this holistic artificial agent. Okay, that's me.
Great, thanks, Mike. Alrighty, well, thanks very much to all of our speakers. Some terrific studies there and lots of good questions popping up in the Hoover app. So, as I said, we'll run through a little bit longer than anticipated, just because we're a tiny bit behind time and we don't want to truncate the discussion too much. So I'll start to go through some of these questions. The first one here is for Mike Nichols. Mike, your scenario seems to be focused on the ability to detect rare or unexpected events in a visual field. Do you see benefits of queuing for scenarios involving expected or anticipated events? So, for example, the target's expected to appear in an area at a given time, like you might get through an intelligence report. That one's from Phil Temby.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Phil. Yeah, look, I guess ours was geared towards this, it mirrors the inattentional blindness, and it's where the gorilla walks in amongst the basketball players, so it's modelled on that. But I think that's actually a really interesting question, and you could very well be queuing enemy combatants. But also still have something which is occurring relatively regularly. And I think what you must probably have there is a sort of a divided attention phenomena going on, where people are attending to the cues, but they're also aware that something's going to be popping up frequently. And I think what you must probably see is people would be able to do that, but you'd actually most probably see less use of the cues, I think. So the benefit of using the cues would drop somewhat because people are actually dividing their attention between the cues and an expected target. So I hope that answers Phil's question.
Yeah, I think that that gets there. I've got a couple of questions for John, sort of following on the AR theme. So John, another one from Phil that's found its way to the top. You might have a little voting block going there, Phil, do you, to get your questions up? So John, why do you think cognitive load improved visual orientation performance in your study?
So just a reminder, those data were based on an online experiment. My current suspicion is that the additional cognitive load task may have actually just made the subjects engage more. Right. I think that's the least interesting interpretation. What we're doing now is testing it in the laboratory. Now we can get back into the laboratory. So yeah, let's find out. We're also going to play with the relative timing as well of that cognitively demanding multitasking.
So apart from the let's say the interface devices, the pointing device, the displays, and so forth, the rest of the experiment is the same as what you'll now run in the lab.
So they didn't have to do the shooting part of the task in the online kind of version. It was more just a purely psychophysics type of experiment and was done largely with undergraduate participants, students. So it might be that they are less engaged with doing the task, whereas in the gamified version of the task, we're hoping that has its own level of engagement, and so you less likely to see a benefit then from something which is going to engage them further if they're already well engaged.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be real, which is interesting. We were presenting the cognitive load task auditorily, and it's a visual task. The primary task is visual. So there could be something in that. I don't know what that is yet, but yeah, I think it's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens next. Yeah. Mike Richardson, you guys pivoted to doing online testing due to COVID restrictions as well, right?
Yeah, so our task actually lended itself relatively easily to developing it online. So originally it was still going to be kind of a video game. We were going to do some eye tracking and use head-mounted displays, which we had to kind of steer away, but we basically took the application and just made it fully online game. So by the end of the project, basically anyone who will be able to download it and play it and get access to data, and it's ended up serving us quite well with all the continued lockdown. So our plan actually is just to now just continuously use the online platform for the rest of the study, because it turns out that we can, for example, we even had teams playing at Macquarie against people at DST in Victoria. So we can do testing that way, which kind of makes it a lot more fun.
Yep, very good. All right. So just looking through the questions again. So John, back on your task, I suppose this is a function of us not having really a lot of time to describe things. I think this is sort of a clarification of methods. Could you just comment on why a visual orientation task was completed prior to the decision making of who to shoot? And I think I understand, but it's probably better in your words.
It was the cue. That was the information that the observer needed to work out who to shoot. So it was, yeah.
It was either sort of
exactly.
averagely pointing
That was the
you or
information. If you didn't have that information available to you, you wouldn't know which one was your friend and which one was the enemy.
Yeah. And the idea of using the Gabor patches was that you had to look at every element, right? So you could be sure that they were all being inspected.
Yeah. And in fact, we're about to look at some other stimulus dimensions in addition to orientation as well, color and depth.
Oh, okay. Right. Interesting.
So the point of the shooting part is really just to gamify the task, to make it something which is intrinsically not particularly interesting into something which people might engage with, and so you can get, you know, good data and so on from the task.
Yep. Great, thanks. Oh, there's a question for me there from Chris Shanahan. Thanks, Chris. I might just take that offline. Or if we've got enough time after talking to the HPRnet partners, we'll address that one. There's one here for Shane. So Shane, how might you cue attention and make sure that people are using the cue? And this one's from Mike Nichols.
Oh, thanks, Mike. One idea is the cue based on eye movement. If it's detected that, you know, the operator hasn't looked at the transparency information for a certain amount of time, or during a critical time, that you might then flash that information or put some sort of box around it to get people's attention. Interesting, Mike. I'm not sure. Yeah, you're right. We'll have to. That doesn't mean people will look at it. It's a good point. So I'll have to think about that. Yeah. Another one is the DRT. So I don't know if people are familiar with that, but a detection response time task. We've been using that a lot with submarine work here. It's a pretty good indicator of spare capacity, and that can be an indicator of how much effort people are putting in, and or how complacent people are in regards to the automation, or how involved they are in the non-automated tasks. So if that reaches some sort of threshold, we might again cue people to the information. But that's a good point. We'll have to think about how we can ensure that people actually look.
Oh, sorry, Shane, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out, I forgot to mention the two Chris's, Shanahan and Best, and Nadella are also involved in this project when I gave my presentation. Yeah. So
Shane, how have you been implementing the DRT in your other work?
So they're two separate units. So say that the submarine, the cruise that some people might be familiar with, as an example, and then the DRT, they're separate units, and we timestamp them so that we get, you know, an indication of what's running in parallel. And yes, if at the moment we've only used the DRT as a measure of workload while people are doing that task. We haven't used it yet as a, you know, to use it as a threshold for changing the way that information is presented to people or how much work they're doing. That's what we're trying to do in cruise. And then in the case of the transparency, an indicator of how hard they're working. So that's the next challenge, which will require a bit of technical expertise. Yeah.
No worries. All right. There's a couple of questions here for Amanda. So Amanda, to accompany the change in colour perception, are you looking at an operational performance metric along the lines of the USAF OBVA?
Yeah, we will. So the plan is to put them into a simulation and then put standard colour schemas against adjusted colour schemas with the lab and have a look at what that does to performance. So that's in part 2, which I will hopefully have at next year's conference.
Very good. And a follow-up, it looks like your Deuteranope subject improved in their green M wavelength sensitivity with the LEP. Any idea why, and was that statistically significant?
Yes, so it is definitely significant. It comes out as a very big significant change. I don't think it's them magically seeing green. What I think is is that the laser eye protection is shifting the spectrum and creating a luminance cue. So I think that they're getting cues that aren't necessarily colour specific. And so I think a big part of where we go with these schemas will be looking at what does that actually look like through the piece of protection itself. It may not necessarily appear as the same colour, but it may have something else that's then giving the same cue.
So that's an interesting point, right? Because the kinds of cockpit displays, you know, that you're looking to examine, the sort of glass cockpit style coloured displays, they don't eliminate, you know, confounds between colour and luminance, for example, right?
Nope. But yeah, and that's where you can kind of play with one over the other. So if you wanted to change those and you wanted to say, okay, I want you to see this particular color and I want it to come across as this perception, maybe I need to make that one brighter, maybe I need to increase the luminance in one of these because I know that this particular piece of protection is going to reduce it. So hey, when you're wearing this, you need to bump this up for these sort of people, and maybe we can tailor that individually. We're not there yet, but I'd love to see that as a long-term goal for an individual pilot, because even within your normal population, not everyone has exactly the same perception for red, green and blue. They've all got those sort of individual limits, and so there'll be a little bit of variability that if we could play with that, we'll have a look at doing as well.
Yeah, and just while we're on the, I guess the design of the cockpit displays, so colour's been used in commercial aviation, you know, for a while. Are you aware of whether that's been done in sort of a principled way, or is it pretty much sort of a fairly ad hoc sort of approach so far?
There are principles around how many colours to use and which colours, like keeping colour meanings consistent. So there are absolutely some principles around some of that. And so if there is the ability to present that similar and keep that colour meaning, I think that's worth doing, because there are some natural kind of things that come across. So there's some work where they tested green versus go or red versus shoot, and there was a massive preference for red means shoot rather than green to go to press the button, right? So I think it depends on the context of the task that they're doing and trying to keep those if you can, and if you can play with the effect of the brightness of it or the wavelengths that go into making that up, then I think that that's worth investigating and playing with. But it is really each individual laser eye protection piece specific as to what they actually cut out.
Right. And so that raises another interesting question, right, which is that there are different kinds of LEP devices out there, and not yet any sort of standards around how they're designed.
There's not a specific standard as such. There's a certain sort of minimum amount that they have to protect you on, and most of them are going to be ones that take out some of the wavelengths. There's some other interesting ones there that sort of look at can we change the energy that's coming through. There's some advanced changes that are there. The issue, I think, for us is that they're not here yet for some of those new designs and bits and pieces. And so we really are stuck with the colour filter type LEPs that are taking some of those wavelengths out.
Yeah, good one. All right, just having a scroll through. So Mari, I might take the opportunity to ask something that popped into my mind of you while you're giving your briefing. You're bringing together a lot of sensors in a relatively confined area, and so are the physical space constraints and things like occlusion and so forth going to be significant constraints for what data you can get about the operator's state for your project?
No, thank you, Chris. Actually, I don't know if it was clear, obviously not in my presentation. It's not because the sensors and the system that we've put together, it's for that specific space. So the mock-up that we've built in the facility, actually it used to be in the background. I had to move it into a different room on its own room because we're doing work with it, and this is only for testing. But every single sensor, it's tested for exactly the same dimensions. And it has also, the height is identical, the chairs, we had to fix the chairs, the distance between the shoulders, where the monitors are identical. So it's designed for that. If you ask me to transplant this system, the sensory system, we haven't developed anything about learning yet, just the sensory system into a different environment, it wouldn't work. That's why, for example, because it's very strict to where is this, based on where the screens, the 3 monitors are, based on where they're seated, based on where the computer, based on the noise, based on the microphone that they have, because we also record, it's only for that space. So no, it's not. But we spent a lot of time designing for that specific environment. So yes, hopefully, and David Ryan, one of our collaborators is here. In the future, we would like to adapt it to different spaces, but that would be a different study. So this is very, very strict to that space. Something I miss in my presentation, because I have so much pressure, guys, here. We have a control room and everyone's watching me, and everyone like also keep it to 5, don't go 45. So I've missed the part that this year, if you ask me, to be honest, what was the highlight, was just before the lockdown, we had, and I want to thank him, a physical visit, consultation, and actually assessment of our system by major Eugene Sullivan, the early Alzheimer's, Eugene Sullivan, who was recommended to us by our collaborator, Major Hamsey, and he's the only trained flight operator for the Shadow 200 in New South Wales. He used to work in Brisbane, and now he's moved to the Randwick barracks. So although he's in a different position right now, it did make a big difference to have an actual flight operator from Russ's group here to evaluate, to have all the sensor on, to be in the environment, and his feedback was really very encouraging to us that we were in the right direction. Otherwise, it's irrelevant for something that it's based on a specific use scenario. So yes.
Yeah, that engagement from 20 STA has really been very positive, hasn't it?
I cannot look, when I said that, I don't say that to be pleasant, that I couldn't wish for better collaborators, but we struggled, both the team in Brisbane and us, a lot due to the lockdowns. Russ was always here. Major Hamsey was always here, on the phone, emails, sending information, connecting us to Eugene, that before the lockdown also spent hours in here with us. Otherwise, it would be impossible to move forward, because of course, yes, we work with sensors, we work with, but we didn't have enough information about what's happening in the space, about protocol, about changing of uniforms, about what's happening that could affect the sensors, about what's happening in the 5% of time when they have to put the helmet on and a special jacket, about how much it weighs, about how we would interfere with a small radar. Like, there was all these things that, so we're grateful. And yes, hopefully we can physically meet, and hopefully we can actually implement it in the next year in Brisbane.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really a good example of how everyone wins out of that close collaboration between the ADF and DST and the university partners. Is, you know, the outcomes that you produce are going to be so much more relevant than they would otherwise have been, because you've had that ability to really interact very closely with the ADF stakeholder.
For our team, and I'm sure for other people, but wearing it also back to the drawing board, because what you know is irrelevant to something. There's so many things we didn't know, and the technology without the situational context is useless. Like what works in here in some sort of an full control environment that we control, it's just it's only a very small percentage. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be next year.
Cheers, Mara. I've had a question come through from Mike Richardson. Mike, Mike, do you have any thoughts about how more deterministic rule-based behaviours and decisions, for example, those derived from standard operating procedures and protocols, can be incorporated into the adaptive flexible action decision dynamics and dynamic action models that you're developing. So I guess more sort of, yeah, incorporating the dynamic models and the more sort of rule-based approach that sometimes operators train to.
Yeah, well, in terms of the, well, if we're talking just about at the decision level, then the kind of framework that we've been building, I mean, it's using, existing, technologies, relatively new ones, but it can be applied at any level of constraint. So, we're trying to make our systems as flexible as possible so that they can be used in situations which weren't there during training or didn't exist in data collection. But if the task is highly constrained, then the models will also be highly constrained. And so you can use them as a way to kind of validate the constraints that are imposed, the degree to which the flexibility of those decisions are truly restricted to those constraints, but then also using the explainable A technologies. The more constrained it is, the easier it is then to identify whether individuals are actually making decisions in the appropriate way. And so that's kind of I think the biggest, well, the coolest thing for me this year is to actually finally see that we can take, like the dynamical models are easily understandable. We can open them up, we can look at the parameters, we can see what's going on. The neural network models are fantastic, but now using these explainable eye techniques, we can, open up the lid, so to speak. And what's been exciting this year is to actually see that we can in fact use those techniques to see what people are using to make the decisions and what constraints they're self-imposing. People will often impose constraints on their own behavior in order to make it more predictable, more manageable. One thing that we've seen in this project is that as people get more expert, less communication, more targeted, they place more constraints on how they both interact with each other, move with respect to each other, and communicate with each other. And so you're almost kind of seeing those constraints emerge. And so, yeah, I fully expect that it could be used in both contexts. I hope that's kind of an answer to the question.
Yeah, so essentially the kind of rule-based behaviour is embedded in the model by virtue of the model having been derived from expert performance. Is that more or less? Yeah.
And then you can see that emerge if you had novices through the experts. You should see that emerge both in the predictions, but then also in why the model is making those specific predictions.
Right. It's interesting that you say that you're seeing as workload increases that your teams are, in a sense, kind of constraining their behaviour. We've seen that before in earlier work where we've been tracking communication dynamics and seen a loss of complexity under workload, which we kind of analogize to things like injury and aging and so forth. But in team tasks, all of a sudden the communication is becoming fairly regular and simple. But then when the task constraints are off and things are fairly easy, the complexity comes back and it's a bit more free flowing.
Yeah, so we've just got, I mean, you and Simon will actually see this in the not too distant future. We're working on a paper at the moment where it's kind of a minor finding, but using some nonlinear time series techniques showing how you see reductions in the complexity and deterministic structure of the individual. But if you analyze it at the collective level, you see increases in the structure of the coordination. So you kind of get this what's changing or decreasing at the lower level is actually increasing the robustness at the team level with regards to communication. So potentially some interesting avenues for future work there.
Absolutely. Very good. Well, look, I think that just about gets us there for today. Let me just do one last scan. I think I missed one. So maybe just a quick one for John. Sorry, I missed this earlier. So the question is, noticed the use of NIRS. How was this integrated into your study design? That's on behalf of Tim L.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, the question is about So we'll be using functional near infrared spectroscopy, and that comes in the next phase when we're using our augmented reality system. So we'll actually be able to mount that through the HoloLens 2, and we'll be using an event-based design. So many trials, discrete trials, and we'll be able to use an event-based design to analyze. Particularly, we're going to be looking probably at frontal activity. That's where we've seen cognitive load effects before.
Yeah, so the FMUS is going to be another measure of cognitive load and stress, essentially, to assess where people start to become overloaded and where performance starts to drop off.
Great, no worries. All right, well, we might wrap it up there. Thanks very much to all the speakers for their great briefings and also for their participation in the Q&A session. Really appreciate it. So what we'll do now is we'll break and hang on, I'm just looking at my chat from the folks behind the curtain. Back at 14:55. Thank you very much, Lisa. So we'll break now and come back at 14:55. Thanks very much, everyone.